The Lancaster estate sat like a crown jewel atop the rolling hillside, its manicured gardens and stone facade visible from 3 villages away. Within its walls, wealth had accumulated over generations, alongside the quiet footsteps of those who maintained it. Maria Cardoso polished the banister of the grand staircase with methodical precision, her hands raw from years of cleaning products and hard water. Behind her, a small girl with wild curls and skinned knees sat on the bottom step, carefully coloring inside a tattered book of fairy tales. "Emily," Maria whispered in her Portuguese-accented English, "remember what I told you? Quiet as a mouse when Mama works." 7-year-old Emily nodded solemnly, pressing her crayon more gently against the page. She'd been coming to work with her mother since she could remember, on days when school was out and there was nowhere else for her to go. The Lancaster family tolerated it, mostly because Mrs. Lancaster rarely noticed and Mr. Lancaster was too buried in business affairs to care. Their son, Andrew, however, noticed everything. "Is that Cinderella?" he asked, appearing suddenly from the hallway that led to the kitchen. At 8, he was already tall for his age, blonde hair neatly combed, pressed shorts and a polo shirt, making him look like a miniature version of his father. Emily clutched her book protectively. "Yes." Maria stiffened, but kept working, eyes lowered. The children weren't supposed to interact. Mrs. Lancaster had made that abundantly clear. Andrew plopped down beside Emily, his expensive shoes dangling next to her scuffed sneakers. "I don't like that story," he declared. "The prince is stupid. If he really loved her, he would have remembered her face, not just her shoe size." Despite herself, Emily giggled. Maria shot her a warning look, but a door slammed somewhere upstairs, and suddenly Andrew was grabbing Emily's hand. "Quick," he whispered. "Mother's coming. We can hide in the garden maze." Before Maria could protest, they were gone. 2 sets of footsteps, one sure and one hesitant, disappearing down the hall. That was the beginning. By the time they were 10 and 11, Andrew and Emily had established a routine. On Saturdays, when Emily accompanied her mother to the estate, Andrew would wait until his morning lessons with the private tutor were complete, then make his escape. They would meet in the center of the garden maze, where a stone bench sat beneath an ancient oak. "One day I'm going to build a house right here," Andrew announced one summer afternoon, lying on his back in the grass. "And no one will be able to find it except us." Emily sat cross-legged beside him, weaving clover stems into a chain. "You can't build a house in your parents' garden." "When I'm grown up, this will all be mine," he said with the innocent certainty of inherited privilege. "I'll let you live here too." Emily's fingers stilled. Even at 10, she understood the impossibility of his promise. "I'm going to have my own house," she said finally, "with yellow curtains and lots of books." Andrew rolled onto his side to look at her. "We could have yellow curtains here," he offered. She smiled, but the moment was interrupted by a sudden wave of dizziness that made the world tilt. Emily closed her eyes, waiting for it to pass, as it always did. "Are you okay?" Andrew's voice sounded far away. "Just tired," she mumbled, an excuse she'd heard her mother use countless times. Andrew sat up, concern etching his young face. "You look really pale." He pressed his palm to her forehead like his nanny did when he was sick. "Maybe we should tell someone." "No." The force of her response surprised them both. "I'm fine, really. My mom can't know I got sick again." "Again?" Emily looked away. "Sometimes I get dizzy, or really tired. Mom says I just need more iron, like spinach and stuff." Andrew made a face. "Spinach is gross. It's not so bad with lots of lemon." She carefully changed the subject. "Anyway, tell me more about your house in the maze." By the time they parted that day, the incident was forgotten. By Andrew, at least. For Emily, it was one more secret to keep. Years passed in a blur of seasons. Birthdays, holidays, school terms beginning and ending. Emily enrolled in the local comprehensive school. Andrew was sent to an exclusive prep academy, but returned home most weekends. Their friendship deepened, despite all the forces that should have pulled them apart. When they were 14, they buried a time capsule beneath the oak tree in the maze, an old cookie tin containing Andrew's pocket watch, a family heirloom he'd been gifted but didn't care for. Emily's copy of Jane Eyre with all her favorite passages underlined, and a letter each had written to their future selves. "We should add something else," Andrew said as they prepared to bury it. "Something to make it official." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Andrew produced his Swiss Army knife, another gift he wasn't supposed to have. A blood oath. That's disgusting, Emily said, but she was smiling. It's tradition. Pirates did it. And knight. We're neither pirates nor knights. We're explorers of the future, Andrew insisted with the dramatic flair of adolescence. Come on, just a tiny cut. Unless you're scared. Emily rolled her eyes and held out her palm. Fine. The knife was sharp, and the small incisions stung more than she expected. Andrew did the same to his own hand, then pressed their palms together. Now we're blood brothers, he declared. I'm not your brother, Emily protested. Something shifted in Andrew's expression, a sudden awareness that hadn't been there before. No, he agreed softly, you're not. Their hands remained clasped longer than necessary, blood mingling between their palms. When they finally pulled apart, Emily felt lightheaded again, but this time she wasn't sure if it was her mysterious spells or something else entirely. At 16, everything changed. Andrew had grown into his lanky frame, his childhood prettiness hardening into handsome features that drew appreciative glances from girls at both their schools. Emily had blossomed too, her wild curls tamed into a glossy curtain, her bookish nature balanced by a quiet confidence. They still met in the maze when they could, though Andrew's social calendar had grown increasingly crowded with events his mother insisted were crucial for his future. Still, he always found time for Emily, even if it meant sneaking out after dark. I got accepted to Oxford, he told her one spring evening as they sat on their bench. Early admission. Emily's heart sank, though she kept her expression neutral. That's amazing, she said, meaning it despite her sadness. Your parents must be thrilled. Father is. Mother wanted Cambridge, like her side of the family. And what do you want? Andrew looked at her for a long moment. I want, he began, then stopped. I want to study business and economics so I can take over the family holdings eventually. That's the plan. That's the plan, Emily echoed. But is it what you want? He shrugged, suddenly very interested in a loose thread on his sleeve. What about you? Any university plans? Emily laughed, the sound brittle. Not likely. Mom can barely afford rent since your mother cut her hours. Andrew frowned. She did what? It's fine, I'm working at the bookshop in town after school now. I like it there, but you're so smart. You should be applying to universities. Emily's face softened at the nickname only he used. Life isn't always about what should be. The silence between them grew heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Andrew cleared his throat. I got you something? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Emily hesitated. Andrew, you know I can't. It's not expensive, he lied. Just, I wanted you to have something to remember me by when I go. She opened the box to find a delicate silver chain with a small compass pendant. So you'll always find your way, he explained, voice unexpectedly rough. Emily blinked rapidly against the threat of tears. It's beautiful. Turn around, I'll put it on. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp, sending a shiver down her spine. When she turned back to thank him, she found his face inches from hers, eyes dark with an emotion she was afraid to name. Emily, he whispered, her name like a prayer on his lips. When the kiss came, it felt inevitable, as natural as breathing, yet as monumental as the shifting of continents. His hands cradled her face as though she was something precious, and for that moment she allowed herself to believe she was. Neither noticed the figure watching from the edge of the maze, face twisted with cold fury. The next morning, Emily woke to find her mother sitting on the edge of her bed, eyes red-rimmed. What's wrong? Emily asked, instantly alert. Mrs. Lancaster has requested we vacate the cottage by the end of the month, Maria said flatly. She's letting me go. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Why? Maria's gaze was knowing. She mentioned something about inappropriate relationships. But, Emily? Maria interrupted, taking her daughter's hands. We always knew this wasn't forever. I've been saving. We'll find something in town. Emily nodded numbly, mind racing. I'll look for more hours at the bookshop. Or maybe the cafe is hiring. No, Maria said firmly. You'll focus on school. You're going to have opportunities I never had. Emily opened her mouth to argue but was overcome by a wave of fatigue so intense, her vision darkened at the edges. She swayed slightly, and Maria's expression shifted from determination to concern. Another spell? That's the third this month. I'm fine, Emily insisted, Just didn't sleep well. Her mother looked unconvinced but didn't press. Rest today. I'll start packing. Later, when she was certain her mother had left for her final days of work at the Lancaster estate, Emily slipped out to find Andrew. She needed to tell him what had happened, to make plans before everything fell apart. But when she reached their secret place in the maze, she found only emptiness and a gardener removing the bench where they'd sat for so many years. "Where's Andrew?" she asked, voice small. The gardener shrugged. "Young master left for London this morning. Some special program before university," Mrs. Lancaster said. He'd gone without saying goodbye, without a word. Emily clutched the compass around her neck, its promise already broken. She turned to leave, legs unsteady, when she noticed freshly turned earth by the oak tree, the spot where they'd buried their time capsule. She fell to her knees, digging frantically with her bare hands until her fingers scraped metal. The cookie tin was still there, but when she opened it, its contents had changed. The watch and book remained, but the letters they'd written were gone. In their place was a single note in Andrew's handwriting. "I'll find you again, I promise. Wait." Emily pressed the note to her chest, tears flowing freely now. "I'll wait," she whispered to the empty garden, "but not forever." 7 years could change everything, and nothing at all. Emily Cardoso stood behind the polished mahogany bar of the Wellington, a high-end pub in Kensington, where bankers and lawyers came to unwind after making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Her fingers ached from carrying trays all evening, but her face revealed nothing as she mixed another gin and tonic with practiced precision. At 25, she'd grown into a woman whose quiet elegance belied her circumstances. Her dark curls were pulled back in a simple knot, her uniform crisp despite the long shift. Only the delicate silver compass that hung at her throat hinted at a story beneath the surface. "Another round for table 12, Mitch," the other bartender called out. "And they're getting properly pissed, so keep an eye out." Emily nodded, loading drinks onto her tray. Thursday nights were always busy, a prelude to the weekend that brought in the wealthiest clientele. She balanced the heavy tray against her hip, ignoring the familiar lightheadedness that had become her constant companion. "Just get through tonight," she told herself. "Then you can rest tomorrow before your shift at the bookshop." The cacophony of laughter grew louder as she approached table 12, a corporate celebration of some kind. 8 men in expensive suits with loosened ties, and 1 woman in a designer dress that probably cost more than Emily's monthly rent. "Your drinks, gentlemen," she said, carefully setting down each glass. "And for the lady." "Thanks, love," one of the men slurred, his hand brushing against hers. Emily stepped back with practiced ease, maintaining her professional smile. She'd almost finished distributing the drinks when the pub door swung open, bringing with it a gust of rain-soaked air and the last person she ever expected to see again. Andrew Lancaster stood in the doorway, water dripping from his overcoat, his features more defined than she remembered, but still unmistakably him. Beside him stood a willowy blonde, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. Time seemed to stop. The glass Emily was holding slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in a spray of amber liquid and crystalline shards. "I'm so sorry," she mumbled, crouching to gather the larger pieces, aware of annoyed glances from the customers. "Don't worry about it," one man said impatiently. "Just get another one." Her hands trembled as she collected the broken glass, praying Andrew wouldn't notice her. But when she stood, his eyes were already locked on hers from across the room, wide with disbelief and something else she couldn't name. Recognition dawned slowly on his face, followed by an emotion so raw it made her look away. By the time she returned with a replacement drink and a towel for the spill, he and his companion had been seated at a corner table. Emily worked methodically, focusing on each task with rigid intensity. Clear table 7. Refill water at table 4. Take orders from the new arrivals at table 9. Anything to avoid looking at the corner where Andrew sat with the beautiful blonde. But she could feel his gaze following her around the room. Near the end of her shift, as she collected empty glasses from a recently vacated table, a voice behind her made her freeze. "Emily?" She turned slowly, forcing herself to meet his eyes. Up close, the changes in him were more apparent. A faint scar above his right eyebrow that hadn't been there before, fine lines at the corners of his eyes, a gravitas that had replaced his youthful exuberance. "Hello, Andrew," she said quietly. I can't believe it's you. His voice held wonder and confusion. You disappeared. I tried to find you when I came back. Emily's grip tightened on her tray. Did you? When exactly was that? He had the grace to look ashamed. A year later, I came home from Oxford for Christmas break and went to your old cottage. Someone else was living there. What did you expect? The words came out sharper than she intended. Your mother fired mine without a preface. We couldn't afford to stay in the village. Andrew's expression darkened. I didn't know. She told me you'd both moved away for a better opportunity. Emily laughed, a hollow sound. Is that what she called it? Andrew, darling. The blonde appeared at his elbow, eyeing Emily with thinly veiled curiosity. We should get going if we're going to make our reservation. Victoria, he said, not taking his eyes off Emily. Could you give us a moment? Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose, but she retreated with practiced poise. Of course. I'll wait in the car. When she was gone, Andrew stepped closer. Can we talk? Please? I'm working. After your shift, then. I'll wait. Emily should have said no. She had an early morning, a small flat that needed cleaning, a life carefully constructed to protect herself from exactly this kind of disruption. Instead, she heard herself say, I'm done at midnight. The rain had stopped by the time Emily emerged from the staff entrance, but the air remained heavy with moisture. Andrew waited under a street lamp, his tall figure outlined in amber light. He'd sent Victoria home, he explained, claiming a headache. There's a late-night cafe around the corner, he suggested. Emily shook her head. I'd rather walk. They fell into step together, silence stretching between them as they made their way through the deserted streets. After several blocks, Emily spoke. So Victoria, my fiancée, Andrew confirmed, his tone carefully neutral. Family friend. Our parents have known each other forever. Congratulations, Emily said, meaning none of it. The wedding's in 3 months. Another silence, broken only by their footsteps and distant city sounds. Are you happy? Emily finally asked. Andrew stopped walking. That's not an answer. Neither is that. They stood facing each other in the glow of another street lamp, years of unspoken words hanging in the damp air between them. I waited, Emily said at last. For a year I waited for you to come back. Cole, to write anything. My mother got sick. We could barely afford the bedsit we were living in. I worked 3 jobs while finishing school, and still I waited. Then she died, and I stopped waiting. Andrew reached for her, but she stepped back. I'm so sorry about your mother, and I'm sorry I didn't try harder to find you. Why are you here, Andrew? What do you want from me? I don't know, he admitted. When I saw you tonight, it was like everything stepped. Like the last 7 years, just... He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. I've thought about you every day, wondered where you were, what you were doing. But not enough to actually find out, Emily said, the old pain washing over her. That's not fair, isn't it? They were standing too close now. Emily could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy, could see the stubble forming along his jaw. Without the barrier of the bar between them, it was harder to remember all the reasons she should walk away. You're still wearing it, he said suddenly, his gaze dropping to the compass at her throat. Emily's hand automatically went to the pendant. I've thought about throwing it away 100 times.
Why didn't you?
Because some stupid part of me still believed in what it was supposed to mean. The admission cost her, but after 7 years, she owed herself the truth. Andrew's expression crumbled. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cradle her face just as they had all those years ago in the garden maze. I never stopped thinking about you, he whispered, his breath warm against her lips. Never. When they kissed, it was like coming home and heading toward disaster all at once. Emily knew she should push him away, but instead she found herself clinging to him, 7 years of longing breaking through the careful walls she'd built. The London drizzle resumed, gentle at first, then more insistent. They barely noticed, lost in a moment that collapsed time itself. Come home with me, Emily whispered against his mouth, the words surprising even herself. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Are you sure? No, she wasn't sure of anything, except that if she let him walk away now, she might never recover. Yes. Emily's flat was small, 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living area just large enough for a love seat and bookshelves. But it was clean and wholly hers, decorated with second-hand finds and the few treasures she'd managed to keep from her childhood. "It's perfect," Andrew said, looking around with genuine appreciation. His gaze lingered on her overflowing bookshelf. "You still read, all the time. Some habits die hard." Emily hung up their wet coats, painfully aware of him standing in her space, this man who had once been her entire world and was now practically a stranger. An awkward silence descended. What had seemed inevitable on the rain-soaked street now felt complicated in the harsh light of her flat. "I should make tea," she said, needing something to do with her hands. "Emily," Andrew's voice stopped her. "We don't have to do anything. We can just talk." She turned to face him, really looking at him for the first time. Behind the polished exterior of success, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the slight droop to his shoulders that spoke of a weariness beyond physical exhaustion. "You're not happy," she realized aloud. Andrew sank onto her love seat, running both hands through his damp hair. "I'm living the life that was planned for me from birth. Lancaster Holdings is now Lancaster & Son. I have the penthouse, the sports car, the perfect society fiancé. I'm the envy of my peers. But I hate every minute of it," he admitted, the words rushing out like he'd been holding them back for years. "I hate the soulless business meetings, the constant networking, the mind-numbing sameness of it all. Victoria is fine. She understands the world we live in. She doesn't expect passion or deep connection. It's a merger more than a marriage." Emily felt a flash of pity for the beautiful blonde. Does she know that? She doesn't want love any more than I do. Not from me, anyway. Emily sat beside him, close but not touching. "What do you want, Andrew? Right now?" He looked at her, his expression stripped of pretense. "You, just you." The simplicity of it broke something open inside her. 7 years of guarding her heart, of telling herself she was over him, of building a life without the luxury of what-ifs. All of it crumbled in the face of this moment. This time, she was the one who leaned in first. Dawn found them tangled in Emily's sheets, the early light casting soft patterns across their skin. Andrew traced lazy circles on her bare shoulder, his touch igniting sparks even after hours of exploration. "Tell me about your life," he murmured against her hair. "Everything I missed." Emily propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face with new freedom. "It hasn't been very exciting. After Mum died, I finished school, worked where I could, eventually saved enough to take some courses in bookkeeping. Now I juggle the bar job with part-time work at a bookshop and doing accounts for small businesses." "You always were good with numbers," Andrew remembered. "And books. It pays the bills." She didn't mention the exhaustion, the nights she was too tired to eat, persistent health issues she couldn't afford to have properly checked. As if on cue, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She closed her eyes, waiting for it to pass, but this time a warm trickle accompanied the sensation. She touched her face and her fingers came away red with blood. "Emily!" Andrew sat up in alarm. "Your nose is bleeding." "It's nothing," she said automatically, reaching for tissues from her bedside table. "Happens sometimes." Dry air. But Andrew was already out of bed, returning with a damp towel. He cupped her face gently, dabbing at the blood with a tenderness that made her throat tight. "How long has this been happening?" "It's just a nosebleed," she deflected. His eyes narrowed, like the dizzy spells when we were kids were just being tired. "Emily, have you seen a doctor?" "I don't need." "Please," he interrupted, real fear in his voice. "Promise me you'll get checked out." Emily sighed, leaning into his touch. "Healthcare isn't free when you're self-employed with no benefits, Andrew. Some things are luxury items." The stricken look on his face reminded her of how vast the gulf between their worlds remained. She kissed him softly to erase it. "I'm fine," she insisted. "Really?" Later, as they shared coffee and toast in her tiny kitchen, reality began to intrude on their bubble. Andrew's phone had been buzzing periodically, messages from Victoria, his mother, his assistant. "I should go," he said, reluctantly. Emily nodded, steeling herself for the inevitable goodbye. This had been a beautiful interlude, a chance to exorcise old ghosts, but nothing more. Instead, Andrew reached across the table to take her hand. "Can I see you again?" Hope fluttered traitorously in her chest. "Is that a good idea?" "Probably not," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But I let you go once before. I don't think I can do it again." 4 days later, he returned with takeaway and a bottle of wine. The week after that, he brought her soup when she called in sick to the bar with what she insisted was just a bad cold. Within a month, he was spending every free moment he could steal at her flat, creating a parallel life that existed only within those walls. Emily knew it was temporary, that eventually reality would win. But for now, she allowed herself to believe in the impossible, that somehow, this time would be different. She didn't know that Vivian Lancaster had already hired a private investigator to follow her son, that even as Emily and Andrew rediscovered each other, photographs were being compiled, backgrounds checked, histories excavated. She didn't know that catastrophe was already hurtling toward them both. The first sign of trouble came 6 weeks into their affair, when Emily missed her period. At first, she dismissed it as stress or her irregular cycle, a common occurrence since her teen years. But as the days passed and the morning sickness began, denial became impossible. The pregnancy test confirmed what her body already knew. Sitting on the edge of her bathtub, Emily stared at the 2 pink lines with a mixture of terror and wonder. A child. Andrew's child. She knew what this would look like to his world, the bartender getting herself pregnant by the wealthy heir, the gold digger's ultimate play. Already she could imagine the accusations, the sneers, the disbelief that it had been an accident, despite her religious use of contraception. But she also knew, with bone-deep certainty, that she wanted this baby. Her hand drifted to her still, flat stomach, a protective gesture as instinctive as breathing. She would tell Andrew tonight. They'd figure it out together, find some way forward that wouldn't destroy either of their lives completely. Maybe not happily ever after, but something honest and real. The knock at her door came earlier than expected. Emily smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and went to greet him with news that would change everything. But the man at her door wasn't Andrew. "Miss Cardoso?" The stranger wore an expensive suit and a blank expression. "My name is James Norton. I represent the Lancaster family. May I come in?" Emily's blood ran cold. "No, you may not. Whatever you have to say, you can say right here." Norton's lip curled slightly. "Very well. Mrs. Lancaster is aware of your association with her son. She's prepared to offer you a substantial sum to end it immediately and permanently." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me?" £100,000, he continued, as if discussing the weather. "In exchange for your signed agreement, never contact Andrew Lancaster again. Quite generous, considering the circumstances." "Get out," Emily said, her voice shaking with rage. "Miss Cardoso, be reasonable. This dalliance was never going to last. Andrew is engaged to be married. He has responsibilities, a future plan. Get out." She slammed the door in his face, then leaned against it, heart pounding painfully in her chest. Her phone rang minutes later. "Andrew," she answered with trembling hands. "We need to talk," she said, before he could speak. "Your mother sent someone to my flat with a The silence on the other end lasted too long. "Andrew? I'm coming over," he said finally. "Wait for me." The storm that had been threatening all day broke as Emily waited, rain pounding against her windows with violent intensity. By the time Andrew arrived, she was a bundle of nerves, the pregnancy test hidden in her pocket like a talisman. He was soaked through, his expression grim, as he entered her flat. "I'm so sorry, Em. I had no idea," she knew. "She offered me money, Andrew, to disappear from your life." "I'll handle her," he promised, shrugging off his wet coat. "This isn't her decision, dear." "Mate," Emily took a deep breath. "There's something else, something important." She reached for his hand, drawing strength from the connection. "I'm pregnant." Andrew went perfectly still, water dripping from his hair onto his shirt collar. "You're what? Pregnant?" she repeated, watching his face carefully. "I just found out today." A complex series of emotions crossed his features: shock, confusion, fear, and something that might have been joy before uncertainty smothered it. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded, pulling the test from her pocket. "About 6 weeks along, I think." Andrew stared at the plastic stick as if it might bite him. Then slowly he sank onto her love seat, head in his hands. "Say something," Emily pleaded when the silence stretched too long. "I need a minute," he muttered. She waited, her heart sinking with each passing second. This wasn't the reaction she'd hoped for, but she understood his shock. It was a lot to process. Finally, he looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "What do you want to do?" "I want to keep it," she said without hesitation. "I know this complicates everything, but—" "Complicates?" Andrew gave a harsh laugh. "Emily, this isn't just a complication. This is—" He stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "The timing is impossible. I'm getting married in 6 weeks. The company is in the middle of a major merger. My mother is already suspicious." "I'm not asking you for anything," Emily interrupted, hurt blossoming in her chest. "I can do this on my own." "That's not what I meant," he said quickly, but his eyes betrayed him, relief flashing briefly before guilt replaced it. A terrible suspicion began to form in Emily's mind. "Andrew, did you know your mother sent someone to pay me off?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. "She mentioned she was going to handle the situation. I didn't know exactly what she planned. But you didn't stop her." Emily's voice was barely a whisper now. "You knew she was going to try to get rid of me, and you let it happen. It's not that simple." "It is that simple." Anger flared, hot and sudden. "You're still the same boy who left without saying goodbye. Still letting your mother make your decisions. Still too cowardly to choose your own path." Andrew's expression hardened. "That's not fair. You have no idea the pressure I'm under, the responsibility." "No, I don't," Emily cut in. "I don't know what it's like to have every advantage, every door opened for you. I only know what it's like to fight for every single thing I have. To work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over my head. To watch my mother die because we couldn't afford better care." Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away furiously. "Go home, Andrew. Go back to your perfect fiancé and your perfect life. I don't need you, and neither will this baby." "Emily, please." "Your mother was right about one thing," she continued, the words pouring out like poison. "This was never going to last. I was a fool to think you'd changed." Andrew's face drained of color. "You don't mean that?" "I do." The lie tasted bitter, but Emily forced it out. "This was just nostalgia, unfinished business. It's finished now." "And the baby?" His voice cracked on the word. Emily wrapped her arms protectively around her middle. "My baby?" Something in Andrew snapped. "Is it even mine?" he demanded, immediately looking horrified at his own words. The slap echoed in the small room, Emily's palm stinging from the contact with his cheek. "Get out," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. Andrew reached for her, regret written across his features. "Emma didn't mean—" "Get out," she screamed, shoving him toward the door with strength born of rage and heartbreak. He went, pausing only at the threshold. "I'll call you tomorrow, when we're both calmer." Emily slammed the door behind him, sliding down to the floor as sobs tore through her body. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the windows like nature itself shared her fury. When the dizziness came this time, stronger than ever before, Emily welcomed the darkness that followed. The old woman had saved her life. Emily would never forget waking up in an unfamiliar bedroom, sunlight filtering through lace curtains, to find a silver-haired woman placing a cool cloth on her forehead. Margaret Foster, retired nurse and Emily's downstairs neighbor, had heard the fall and used her spare key to check on the poor girl who works too hard. What followed was a whirlwind Emily could barely process, an ambulance ride she couldn't afford, doctors with concerned expressions, tests upon tests, and finally, the miraculous news. The baby was fine. Emily herself was suffering from severe anemia complicated by dehydration and exhaustion, but there was no permanent damage. "You need to take better care of yourself," the doctor had admonished, especially now. Margaret wouldn't let her return to her flat alone. "Nonsense," she'd said when Emily protested. "I've got a spare room and too much time on my hands. You'll stay with me until you're properly on your feet again." That was 5 years ago. 5 years since the night Andrew had walked out of her life for the second time. 5 years of building something new from the ashes of what might have been. Now Emily stood in the small garden behind Margaret's terraced house, watching her daughter chase bubbles through the late afternoon sunlight. Charlotte was a whirlwind of energy, her dark curls bouncing as she jumped and twirled. "Mummy, look," she called, her laughter pure joy as a bubble landed on her outstretched finger before bursting. "I see, darling. You're the bubble queen." Emily smiled, treasuring these moments when Charlotte was simply happy, unburdened by questions about the father she'd never known. They came more frequently now, innocent inquiries that pierced Emily's heart each time. "Where's my daddy? Why don't I have one like Eliza at school? Doesn't he want to see me? Emily had crafted careful answers that were neither lies nor the complete truth. Your daddy lives far away. He doesn't know about you, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make complicated choices. The door to the garden opened, and Margaret emerged with a tray of lemonade. At 76, she moved more slowly than when Emily had first met her, but her eyes were still sharp with intelligence and warmth. Thought you two might need refreshment, she said, setting the tray on the small patio table. Charlotte's birthday preparations all sorted for tomorrow. Emily nodded, grateful for the millionth time for this woman who had become like a grandmother to Charlotte and a mother to her. The cake is in the refrigerator. Decorations are ready. Small but special, just as we planned. 5 years old, Margaret marveled, watching Charlotte chase a butterfly now. Where does the time go? Where indeed? Emily thought, remembering the tiny bundle they'd placed in her arms after 18 hours of labor. She'd done it all alone, or as alone as one could be with Margaret's unwavering support. No Andrew holding her hand, no father pacing in the waiting room. She'd sent him one letter after Charlotte was born, a simple note with the date of birth and a tiny footprint, addressed to his office, not his home. Whether he'd received it, she never knew. There had been no response. Emily had built a good life in the years since. She'd completed her accounting qualification with Margaret's encouragement and now worked from home managing books for several small businesses, allowing her flexible hours with Charlotte. They had moved into the ground floor flat when Margaret's arthritis made stairs difficult, forming an unconventional but loving family unit. If sometimes, in the quiet hours after Charlotte was asleep, Emily found herself touching the compass pendant she still couldn't bring herself to discard, well, that was her secret to keep. "Penny for your thoughts?" Margaret asked, pressing a cool glass into Emily's hand. "Just thinking about tomorrow," Emily lied gently. 5 is such a milestone. Margaret's knowing gaze suggested she wasn't fooled, but she simply patted Emily's hand. "Indeed it is." Charlotte's birthday dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day for a small garden party. Emily had invited a few children from Charlotte's kindergarten class, plus the elderly couple next door who doted on her daughter. She was arranging fairy cakes on a platter when the first spell hit, a wave of dizziness more intense than anything she'd experienced in months. She gripped the counter waiting for it to pass, but instead felt a warm trickle from her nose. Blood dripped onto the pristine white frosting below. "Bloody hell," she muttered, grabbing a tissue and tilting her head back. She'd been so careful lately, taking her iron supplements, eating properly, getting enough rest. The symptoms had lessened considerably over the past year, allowing her to believe she'd finally conquered whatever persistent anemia had plagued her since childhood. "Emily? The balloon arch is collapsing. I need another." Margaret stopped short in the doorway. "Oh dear. Again?" Emily managed a weak smile around the tissue pressed to her face. "It's nothing. Just stress about the party." "That's the 3rd nosebleed this month," Margaret said, her nurse's eyes assessing. "And don't think I haven't noticed the bruises." "When was your last checkup?" "I'm fine," Emily insisted. "Really?" But she wasn't fine. By the time the children arrived for Charlotte's party, Emily had changed her blouse twice, due to nosebleeds. She plastered on a smile and led games with forced enthusiasm, ignoring the fatigue that seemed to settle in her bones. It was during the cake ceremony that everything fell apart. As Charlotte leaned forward to blow out her candles, Emily suddenly couldn't focus on her daughter's face. The garden tilted sideways, voices becoming distant and tinny. She was vaguely aware of reaching out to steady herself before the world went black. She woke to the sterile white of a hospital room and Margaret's worried face. "There you are," the older woman said, taking Emily's hand. "You gave us quite a scare." Emily tried to sit up, panic setting in. "Charlotte, it's fine," Margaret soothed. "The neighbors took her home with them. She thinks you got too hot in the sun." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a spike of fear as a doctor entered the room, his expression grave in a way that made Emily's stomach clench. "Miss Cardoso, I'm Dr. Richardson," he said, checking her chart before meeting her eyes. "We've run some preliminary tests. Your blood work is showing some concerning abnormalities. I'd like to perform a bone marrow biopsy as soon as possible." The words washed over her like ice water. "What are you looking for?" He hesitated, just long enough. "It could be several things. Best not to speculate until we have more information. But Emily knew. Some part of her had always known. Andrew Lancaster stood at the window of his penthouse office, staring unseeing at the London skyline. Behind him, papers were spread across his desk, contracts, projections, acquisitions, all bearing the Lancaster Holdings logo that had once represented his future, but now felt like a prison sentence. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Lancaster, your mother is here to see you." Andrew suppressed a sigh. "Send her in." Vivian Lancaster entered like royalty, immaculately dressed in Chanel, not a silver hair out of place. At 62, she remained a formidable presence in both the business world and London society. "Andrew, darling," she kissed his cheek. "You're looking thin. Is Victoria not feeding you properly?" "I'm fine, Mother." He gestured to a chair. "What brings you by?" "The charity gala preparations going well?" "Perfectly on track," she assured him, sitting with practiced elegance. "Actually, I came about the Dorchester property. The board is split on whether to convert to luxury flats or maintain it as a hotel. Your father always valued your instincts on these matters." Andrew nodded mechanically, barely registering her words. His father had suffered a debilitating stroke 2 years ago, leaving Andrew fully in charge of the family empire despite Vivian's continued influence behind the scenes. "I'll review the proposals," he promised, knowing it was easier than arguing. Vivian studied him with shrewd eyes. "You seem distracted lately. Is everything all right with Victoria?" Victoria, his wife of 4 years, currently in the south of France with friends. Their marriage was exactly as he'd predicted to Emily, a business arrangement wrapped in social respectability, maintained separate bedrooms, separate lives, united only by mutual understanding and occasional public appearances. "Victoria's fine," he said shortly. "Just busy with work." His mother nodded approvingly. "I always said she was the perfect match for you. Understands our world." Andrew's jaw tightened. Our world, the gilded cage he'd never found the courage to escape. After the confrontation with Emily, he'd tried to call her the next day as promised. When she didn't answer, he'd gone to her flat, only to find a neighbor who informed him she'd collapsed and been taken to hospital. By the time he tracked down which hospital she had already been discharged, not to her flat, but to an unknown address. For weeks, he'd searched for her. But without her mother's surname or knowledge of her friends, the trail had quickly gone cold. His private investigator found nothing. It was as if Emily Cardoso had simply vanished. Eventually, pressure from all sides had forced him back to his predetermined path. The wedding went ahead as planned. He took his place at the company. Life continued in its gilded, hollow way. Until the letter arrived. No return address, just a simple card with a tiny footprint and a birth date. He'd known immediately what it meant, but by then, it seemed too late to undo the choices he'd made. He kept the card in his wallet, a constant reminder of his greatest failure. "Andrew?" His mother's voice cut through his thoughts. "Did you hear me?" "Sorry, Mother. Just thinking about the Dorchester situation." Vivian rose gracefully. "Well, don't think too long. The board meets on Thursday." She paused at the door. "Oh, and Victoria called this morning. She's extending her trip another week." Andrew nodded, unsurprised. Safe travels to her. After his mother left, Andrew sank into his chair, exhaustion overwhelming him. At 32, he felt decades older, weighed down by regrets and what-ifs. His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Lancaster, they're waiting for you in the conference room." "I'll be right there." He straightened his tie, donned the mask of confidence he wore like armor, and went to play his part once more. Later that evening, Andrew entered his penthouse, the silence engulfing him. He loosened his tie, poured a scotch, and wandered into his study, the one room Victoria had allowed him to design himself. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that reminded him of simpler times. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and removed an old cookie tin, its surface scratched and dented. Inside lay the artifacts of a different life. The pocket watch his father had given him, now ticking faithfully after all these years, a dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre with delicate notes in the margins, and a stack of letters, never sent, addressed simply to Emily. A knock at his door interrupted his reverie. Frowning, Andrew checked his watch, nearly midnight. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, his housekeeper stood there, apologetic despite the late hour. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Lancaster, but there's a woman here insisting on seeing you. I told her you don't take visitors without appointments, but she's quite determined. Before Andrew could respond, an elderly woman appeared behind the housekeeper, her silver hair in a neat bun, her eyes sharp with purpose. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, her voice firm despite her frail appearance. "My name is Margaret Foster. I believe you know Emily Cardoso." Andrew felt the blood drain from his face. "Please come in." Once they were seated in his living room, the housekeeper dismissed with assurances that everything was fine. Andrew studied the woman before him. She returned his gaze with equal intensity, clearly taking his measure. "How is she?" he finally asked, the question haunting him for years. Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Not well, I'm afraid. That's why I'm here." Fear gripped him. "What's happened?" "Leukemia," Margaret said simply. "Advanced. She's been in and out of hospital for months, but now," she paused, collecting herself. "The doctors say weeks, maybe less." Andrew felt like he'd been punched. Emily, vibrant, fierce. Emily, dying. It seemed impossible. There must be something, treatments. Specialists. They've tried everything covered by the NHS. Experimental treatments might buy a little time, but they're prohibitively expensive, and Emily refuses to go into debt that would fall to Charlotte after she's gone. "Charlotte," Andrew repeated, the name unfamiliar yet instantly precious. "Your daughter," Margaret confirmed. "She's 5. Beautiful, smart as a whip. Has your eyes." Andrew closed his eyes, overwhelmed. A daughter, a child he'd never seen, never held. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked when he could trust his voice. "Because Emily wouldn't," Margaret said plainly. "She's proud, stubborn, but I've watched her struggle for 5 years, raising that child alone while battling an illness that's been slowly consuming her since childhood. Those dizzy spells she had even as a girl, early warning signs no one caught." Margaret leaned forward, her gaze intense. "She doesn't know I'm here, would skin me alive if he did. But that little girl deserves a chance to know her father. And Emily deserves better than to spend her final days worrying about what will happen to Charlotte after she's gone." Andrew was already on his feet. "Take me to them, please." "It's not that simple," Margaret cautioned. "Emily may not want to see you." "I don't care," Andrew said with sudden clarity. "I've spent 15 years doing what's expected, what's proper, what's easy. Not this time." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my driver. We leave now." The hospital room was quiet, save for the steady beep of monitors. Emily lay with her eyes closed, her once vibrant curls reduced to a scarf-covered head, her skin pale against the white sheets. In a chair beside the bed, Charlotte had fallen asleep, her small body curled awkwardly, one hand still clutching her mother's. Andrew stood frozen in the doorway, the sight hitting him with physical force. This was his family, the woman he'd never stopped loving and the daughter he'd never known, both found and lost in the same moment. Margaret gently lifted Charlotte, who stirred but didn't wake. "I'll take her to the waiting room," she whispered. "She's exhausted." As the door closed behind them, Andrew approached the bed on unsteady legs. Emily's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to disbelief as she recognized him. "Am I dreaming?" she whispered, her voice thin but still undeniably hers. "No," Andrew said, taking her hand gently, shocked at how fragile it felt. "I'm really here." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "Margaret," she sighed, "I should have known she'd track you down." "I'm glad she did." Andrew pulled a chair close to the bed, still holding her hand like a lifeline. "Emily, I'm so sorry for everything." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Big words, Lancaster." "I mean them," he insisted. "I should have found you. I should have been there, for both of you." Emily's expression softened. "She looks like you know. Same eyes, same stubborn chin." "She's beautiful," Andrew said, his throat tight. "Like her mother. Charmer." Emily's attempt at lightness dissolved into a coughing fit that left her gasping. Andrew helped her sip water, his heart breaking at how much effort it took her to perform even this simple act. When she could speak again, Emily's voice was weaker. "Why are you here, Andrew? Really?" "Because I never stopped loving you," he said simply, the truth he'd denied himself for years. "Because I want to know my daughter. Because I need to make things right, even if I'm 15 years too late." "I received your letter," he continued. "The one with Charlotte's footprint. I tried to find you, but you disappeared." "I didn't want to be found," Emily admitted. "I was scared and hurt and proud. Too proud." Andrew brushed a tear from her cheek. "I left Victoria," he said quietly, "6 months ago. The divorce will be final next month." Emily looked genuinely surprised. "What about the company? Your mother?" "I'm still running the business, but on my terms now." "As for mother," he smiled ruefully, "let's just say she's still adjusting to the new normal." They talked for hours, or rather Andrew talked, while Emily listened, saving her strength. He told her about the years without her, the emptiness of the life he'd chosen, how finding her footprint card had been both salvation and torture. She told him about Charlotte, her first words, her love of books, her uncanny ability to find four-leaf clovers. Eventually, Emily's eyes grew heavy. "I should rest," she murmured. "Charlotte will be back soon. I want you to meet her properly." Andrew nodded, throat too tight for words. As he stood to let her sleep, Emily caught his hand. "I kept it," she whispered, fingers touching the compass at her throat. All this time, Andrew bent to kiss her forehead, a promise and an apology in one gesture. "Rest now. I'll be here when you wake up." The next weeks passed in a blur. Against all medical advice, Emily insisted on returning home for whatever time she had left. Andrew arranged everything: private nurses, comfortable equipment, specialists who came to the house. He moved into Margaret's spare room, determined not to miss another moment. Charlotte was wary of him at first, this stranger who had suddenly appeared in their lives, but children are resilient and forgiving in ways adults can only envy. Within days, she was showing him her favorite books, demanding piggyback rides, interrogating him about his childhood with her mother. Emily watched them from her makeshift bed in the living room, joy and sorrow mingling in her gaze. During her stronger moments, they would sit together as a family, playing board games or watching Charlotte's favorite films. On her bad days, Andrew would read aloud from Jane Eyre while she drifted in and out of sleep, Charlotte curled beside her. "You're good with her," Emily observed one evening after Charlotte had gone to bed. The summer twilight lingered, casting golden light through the windows. "Better than I expected," Andrew smiled, taking her hand. "She makes it easy. She's extraordinary, Em. Just like you." "I need you to promise me something," Emily said, her voice suddenly urgent. "When I'm gone." "Emily, don't." "When I'm gone," she repeated firmly. "Tell her everything. The truth. All of it. How we met as children, how we found each other again, how circumstances tore us apart. Don't let her believe, even for a moment, that she wasn't wanted or loved by both of us." Andrew nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "And one more thing," Emily continued, fighting fatigue to say what needed saying. "Don't let her be alone. Even when she pushes you away, and she will, because she's stubborn like both of us, don't let her forget she's loved." "I promise," Andrew whispered, bringing her hand to his lips. "With everything I am, I promise." On her last day, Emily asked to sit in the garden. The August heat had given way to a perfect day. Blue skies, gentle breeze, flowers in full bloom. Andrew carried her to a chaise longue beneath the apple tree, Charlotte dancing around them with childish energy that belied the gravity of the moment. "It's so beautiful," Emily murmured, her voice barely audible now. "I always loved summer." Andrew sat beside her, Charlotte playing nearby with Margaret. They had explained to her, as best they could, that Mummy would be going away soon, that her body was too tired to stay. She understood and didn't understand, in the way of children faced with concepts beyond their experience. "I have something for you," Emily said, reaching beneath her blanket. She pressed an envelope into Andrew's hand. "Don't read it now. After." Andrew nodded, tucking it into his pocket. "I love you," he said, the words simple but encompassing everything. Emily smiled, a true smile that briefly banished the illness from her face. "I know," she whispered. "I always knew." That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emily Cardoso took her last breath, surrounded by the family she had created, the daughter who was her greatest joy, the man who had been both her first and last love, and the woman who had become her chosen mother. She left quietly, slipping away between one moment and the next, her hand in Andrew's, her compass pendant catching the final rays of sunlight. 5 years later, the pathway through Richmond Park was dappled with autumn sunlight, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. Andrew walked slowly, matching his pace to his daughter's as she collected particularly vibrant specimens. "Do you think this one's red enough?" Charlotte asked, holding up a maple leaf the color of fire. "Perfect," Andrew assured her. "It'll look beautiful in your collection." At 10, Charlotte Lancaster was a study in contrasts. Her mother's wild curls, but her father's serious blue eyes. Emily's creativity with Andrew's analytical mind. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that somehow encompassed the best of both her parents. They reached their destination, a secluded bench overlooking the pond, where ducks glided peacefully across the surface. It had become their tradition, this walk on Emily's birthday. Charlotte sat beside her father, suddenly solemn. "Can I see it now?" Andrew nodded, removing the envelope from his jacket pocket. The paper was worn at the edges now, opened and refolded countless times. He handed it to Charlotte, who handled it with reverent care. "Dear Charlotte," she read aloud, her voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. "If you're reading this, it means you're old enough to understand the story I never got to tell you myself." Emily's letter continued, page after page of memories, wisdom, and love, poured out for the daughter she knew she wouldn't see grow up. She wrote of her childhood friendship with Andrew, of their separation and reunion, of the joy she felt when she learned she was pregnant. She wrote of regrets and forgiveness, of the strength she hoped Charlotte would inherit, of the father who loved her even before he met her. As Charlotte read the final paragraphs, her voice finally wavered. "Above all, remember this: you were born from love, imperfect, complicated, but real love. Your father and I found each other twice across impossible odds. We were meant to create you, to bring you into this world where you will shine so brightly. Wear your own compass, darling girl. Let it guide you to your own path, not the one others expect. Be brave enough to choose love, even when it's difficult. And know that wherever you go, whatever you become, I am watching over you with boundless pride and endless love. Until we meet again beyond the stars, your mother, Emily." Charlotte carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope, leaning against her father's shoulder as tears slipped down her cheeks. "She would be so proud of you," Andrew said softly, his arm around his daughter. "So very pie." Charlotte nodded, her hand going to the silver compass that hung around her neck, her mother's final gift, passed from one generation to the next. "Do you think she can see us?" Andrew looked up at the clear autumn sky, feeling Emily's presence as strongly as if she sat beside them. "I know she can." They sat in companionable silence, father and daughter, bound by love and loss, and the woman who had given them each other. Around Charlotte's neck, the compass caught the light, pointing the way forward, always forward, while remembering what lay behind.